And it's great to be out here, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present and all those here, Aboriginal descendants, and also in terms of the talk that I'm going to give, acknowledge the people that I worked with, Alan Taylor, Joanna Watson and Marina. So as Marina said, I'm going to talk about relationships and contact, and so pick up a little bit following on what Paul has just talked to you about at the end of his talk. So we've been through those. So there are a number of questions, and as Alan pointed out, we're really just taking a bit of a picture across today to give you the context and giving you some of the wave 1, wave 2 data. The ones that we're looking at here are the ones just in the highlight, but Marina's already talked to you about that, and I think you'll have access to this. The dashboard looks fantastic and is going to be a really useful tool. Marina talked to you about that. Now, the one that I want to focus on is this one on the left, which is asking children. So this is an activity where we gave children a checkerboard and asked them first up, so who are you living with now? Who's in the place, this home that you're in? And can you just put them on the board, put yourself on the board, and they could put themselves on the board wherever they wanted to. And then how close do you feel to the other people that you're living with? And then we asked them to do it again, but this time, who else is important in your life? And can you put those people on the board? And I'll show you a bit of the results and what we get from that, but a little further down. I mean, as for all of us, relationships are absolutely key in terms of how we feel about the world and how we feel about ourselves. And for children in care, that's absolutely critical, because it's those are the people that they have lost some relationships, they're struggling to maintain some relationships, and they're also working to make new ones with the people that they're living with. So it's actually quite a lot of work for them in that area. And so if we just look here, this is the carers' perception. So I'm going to present some carers, but also some children's perceptions. If you look at that left-hand bars, this is the positive end. The other end, which is good to see, is that the negative end is the low bars. So you can see that the carers actually have a view that children are doing quite well in terms of their relationship with their birth family. This is the one that I'm talking about in terms of, so instead of representing the figures, that all you get there is a bar. The bar height means nothing. What's important here is where they put themselves, and let me just translate it a little for you. The red is the child, so they can put themselves anywhere they like on the board. This child has put themselves right in a corner, and on the left-hand side is the people they're currently living with. This is a 7-year-old Aboriginal boy who's actually in kinship care, and he's been there for 16 months. And you can see what he's done is clustered everybody around him. So they're all as close pretty much as they can be. And if we look closely, it's hard to see that, he's got his grandparents as closest to him. And on the other side is how he pictures himself in his relationships with his birth family. Again, he's in the same position. His mother and father and one of his siblings is on that right-hand side, so quite close. And then he's clustered the others of his siblings. So he sees them in two groups, and that they're not closely related to each other and they're not as close to him. So the children have quite a degree of flexibility of where they put themselves. I'm just going to show you another one. This is, again, an 8-year-old Aboriginal boy in foster care for 23 months. You can see that he's, in the red there, he's spaced people much further away from himself. But when he's in his family of origin, you can also see that he's placed everybody else along that back walk, the back side, and himself separately from them. So we're going to be using a lot of these constellations. There's quite a lot of information in something like this, and it's really valuable. And this is just another one, just to show what they can do. We've done similar things in family law, and this child has, in his family of origin, put everyone on the same spot. So in order to do that, they had to be all one on top of the other. But in terms of the... and he's a 15-year-old boy in foster care for 16 months. And so, again, he's in the middle, and he's got people quite closely around him, but not all on the same spot. So what we've then done is looked at the distances that you can generate from something like that and analysed for that. And what it's showing is that, in fact, whether it's wave 1 or wave 2 hasn't made much difference at all to the distance, nor has Aboriginality. Or the time and placement. That may change as we get into a later wave. The type of care hasn't made a difference. So whether it's foster care or kinship care or residential care, we didn't do this because the children were older, and in fact we had a smaller number of them. And the number of reports that they had on the urgent reports made no difference. What did make a difference was the child's age, so the older they were, the more distant they put people from them, and that's not surprising. Teenagers with younger children tend to place people closer to themselves. But the other one in here, and this is the carer household, they place themselves closer to the foster mother or kinship grandmother or so on than anyone else. And boys place themselves more closely to their grandmothers than to everyone else. And they also place themselves more closely to their uncle and their grandfather. So we had an interaction effect there. If we look then at the family of origin, you get, again, a similar picture that Aboriginality in the wave and the type of placement made no difference. The only difference, really, was that they placed themselves more closely to the father and their mother and to their maternal grandmother than they did to anyone else. So and we also saw, and Paul's diagram showed, that their relationship with their maternal relatives is closer than it is for their paternal relatives. What are the main issues that come out of contact? Well, we know the reasons that the literature tells us, and your own personal experience, work experience will tell you, that it's about what children's identity is, how do they see themselves, and how does that relate to their emotional and behavioural development. That's the part we haven't done yet, and there's quite a lot to do in that. The other is a theory about a hypothesis. Does it stabilise the placement, or there are people who say, does it destabilise? Now, this is one of the things where we need to be careful about using means, because it's quite likely that we have subgroups who do different things, and if you use means you can wipe out the understanding and the meaning of what you've got. So we will have to look very closely at that. And then, of course, there's the issue of possibility of reunification, and we don't know how that's going to work and how many of these children are will be reunified. If we look at the number of children who have no contact with either parent, then you can see that there is a small group of 13% in wave 1 and a slightly bigger 18.5% in wave 2. And what we need to look much more closely at is what is it, who are these children that are having no contact with either parent, and why is that? And then if we look at their contact with their mother, their father and their siblings first up, and across waves, you can see that in wave 1, nearly 90% of children in foster care are having contact with their mother, slightly less in kinship care, and again about the same amount in residential care, but the numbers there are much smaller. It drops off a little in wave 2. If we look at fathers, the fathers are much less likely to have contact with children, or children are much less likely to have contact with their fathers than they are with their mothers or with their siblings. And again, that drops off further in wave 2. What's interesting is that siblings stay pretty consistent across the board. That low figure there in kinship care in wave 1, which is down from about the 60% odd, and in wave 2 is siblings who are not living with their other siblings. So if we added in the siblings that they were living with, then that would of course bump it up. So we need to, these figures are based on people who they're not living with. And then if we look at who they're living with, who they're not living with and what contact they're having, again, they have more relationship with their maternal grandparents than with their paternal grandparents, and the same with uncles and aunts. Cousins is higher than it is for their paternal aunts and uncles, and in fact in kinship care it's 71%. So that's the advantage of kinship care for these children in both waves. They are much more likely to see their cousins than if they're in foster care. Just going to quickly go across these. Basically, the middle one is face-to-face contact. Those waves, and I've cut it as Paul did. So you've got foster care is the blue, grandparents is the red, and the other relatives is the green. And you see that most kids across the board are having face-to-face supervised contact. Not much telephone contact. In fact, one of the things in the literature is looking at media, social media and email, very little contact that way in any type of care and in any age group. Goes up for 12 to 17-year-olds, that really bumps up for 12 to 17-year-olds. This is fathers. A very similar picture. What's not clear to you from there is that the bar is that only goes to 60%. So we probably should have put them, maybe rework it and put them all on 100%. And this is their contact with their siblings that they're not living with. And this is in wave 1. And you can see again that if they're living, in this case, if they're in foster care, they're actually seeing their siblings they're not living with more than if they're in with their grandparents. But then you need to add on that some of these are actually living with other siblings as well. Just going to look very quickly here. There's more telephone contact with mother and father and siblings than there is for children in the care of their grandparents. And as I said, there's not much. In fact, I've already said that. What's the issue in terms of how well do the carers say that contact is meeting the child's needs for maintaining those relationships? The left-hand side again is the positive side, and it's dropped a bit in wave 2, but again the not very well and the not at all well is down around 5 to 10. Well, if you add those together, about 10 to 20%. And here there's no difference between boys and girls. Foster care is seen to not do as good a job as kinship care in keeping those relationships, and Aboriginal children poorer than for non-Aboriginal children, and for very young children better, but not as well for children aged 12 to 17. And again, the degree of frequency of contact makes a difference. Just going to talk quickly here about the problems that carers see with maintaining contact. About 1 in 3 see no problems at all, but it drops off in wave 2. The number of problems drops off in wave 2. The 3 main problems that they have: the negative impact on the child, especially for foster carers, parents who cancel, don't show, and then parents' behaviours. And the other interesting issue here is the less frequently reported problems. There's a greater reported hostility between parents and the carer where the child is in kinship care than in foster care. So that's one of the issues around managing those sorts of problems. Very few children don't want contact, very few parents don't want contact. And I think we might just leave it at that. We'll just talk about this one. This is an interesting one because it's a hot issue in the literature about contact with infants and how that is managed. It is seen as a significantly bigger issue by foster carers than it is for kinship carers, but it drops off. Now, some of that will of course be due to the fact that the children are getting older, but even taking account, if you're looking at children under 3, it still drops off in wave 2. And time and distance, again, also drops off. So these are issues for young children, and of course you'd have distance issues in the West and Western areas. So, and I'm not going to do it. Yeah. So basically, the main finding is that children are, both according to themselves and their carers, maintaining some good relationships with their carers, and that they are sustaining over wave 1 and wave 2. They're closer to their birth mother and their foster mother than they are to others, and there's an age effect, and most children are getting regular contact. And kinship carers report more problems than foster carers do. We've got a lot more to do, and we'll look forward to reporting more data as the time goes on. Thank you.